It does challenge, doesn't it, the relation, so to speak, between concept and percept. That relationship has been of interest to philosophers at least since the time of Kant. And Kant says, you know, concepts without intuitions are empty, and intuitions without concepts are blind. But now think about what's happening when you're making observations in quantum physics. It might be argued, you know, I dare say, you know, somebody has argued this, that where what you're seeing challenges your conceptualization, then there's an important respect in which, as Kant says, your intuition is blind. You don't, as it were, know quite what you're seeing. Now, I mean, changing it from quantum physics to relativity, and thinking of the strangeness of conceiving the world. I mean, especially in 1905, think of how strange it would have been to conceive the world like that. For example, you know, conceiving of a four-dimensional non-Euclidean space. You know, what was that like and what is that like now? I mean, isn't there a sense in which, and you know, this is an argument that's been running in philosophy for, well, I would say 100 years. Isn't there a sense in which we can't imagine that space? Strawson, for example, has argued that our geometrical intuitions just are Euclidean. That if we're asked to imagine a triangle which has three straight lines, but the angles of which add up to more than 180 degrees, there's a sense in which we can't imagine that, because when we try to picture it, we're picturing bent lines. You know, we're picturing, as it were, curved lines, and then we're not picturing straight lines. So there's a sense in which there you have concepts without corresponding intuitions. And Strawson would argue, and other Kantian philosophers would argue, and therefore those concepts are, in some important sense, empty. Right, so your question, though, was about Husserl, who wanted to apply all this to mathematics. We've got authentic concepts and we've got symbolic concepts. And Husserl says, we don't understand what we're talking about with these symbolic concepts unless we can trace them back to an authentic concept, a concept that satisfies, as it were, the Kantian criterion of being a full-blooded concept, namely, it has a corresponding intuition. Well, I think what Husserl would say, and you know, he's not alone in this, there's a whole Kantian tradition, including Strawson, that would say this, that where you can't point to a corresponding intuition, you've got an empty concept. And therefore, all you've got, so to speak, are words. I mean, I've heard people argue this about quantum physics. They said, look, it really is a waste of time trying to give you a description of what's happening at a quantum level using ordinary language in ways that would make sense. Because using ordinary language, it just doesn't make sense. This is actually what Russell says in his 1920s book, The ABC of Atoms, in which he provided a very early example of an attempted popularization of quantum theory. And what he says there is, look, there's no way I can describe this in ordinary language in such a way as to make sense, because it challenges assumptions that are, so to speak, built into ordinary language. You have to learn the theory, you have to learn the mathematics. And once you learn the mathematics and know how to apply the mathematics, then it'll make sense, but then you'll see that it can't be put into ordinary language. Now, what's happening there in this Husserlian Kantian view, the reason it can't be put into ordinary language is because it's, as it were, inauthentic. It's verbal rather than you know, something that's attached to our intuition.